So my name is Abigail. Thanks you guys for coming, and it's going to be fun today. We're going to get into heuristic evaluations, or AKA known as a UX audit. For these presentations at Tech Alley, we try to go surface level with UX. That way those who are not practitioners or familiar with UX can kind of get the understanding and gist. And my goal is usually to have something that's tangible and takeaway so that you can start implementing it in your own business. So for today's agenda, I'm going to talk about myself and a little bit of our UX group. I'm going to show you examples of usability principles that you can use for your UX audits, and then we're going to get into the workshop part, which is, okay, now that I know that what these principles are, let's actually do an audit on either your own product, or I have some example apps that we can download and walk through. So Val is, you probably saw her name on the flyer.
I did, I was like,
I'm not Val, but she is a close friend of mine. Some people mix us up because we're both usually speaking. She's in the Philippines right now, so I kind of filled in for her. These are our other organizers who help to run some of our meetings. We meet at Tech Alley usually once a month, but occasionally we'll also have some workshops where you can bring your own laptop and we'll jump into Figma or talk about some of the problems that you're facing in your current roles. I think it's a great group to get in touch with if you have questions. John is really into AI and has that a lot in his workflows, so he's one of those people that you would want to talk to if you wanted to implement some AI into your UX processes. We have a LinkedIn group if you're interested in joining. It's not really active right now, but my goal is to get people to start getting active into it. So whether you are someone who is looking for UX help or you're a UX designer, join this group if you want to get connected and find someone to either engage with your problem and help you solve it, or if you are one of those UX designers who are looking for work. All right. I didn't introduce myself really, but I'm Abegail Otero. I am a product designer. I've worked in the health tech space most recently for a company called Omnicell. They build hardware and software, and this cabinet that I worked on is an automated dispensing cabinet where nurses can get their controlled substances for their patients, for the right patient in the right dosage at the right time. I've since stepped down from that position to help my husband grow a coaching business. So he is starting a business for software engineers who are looking to level up in their careers. And I've taken on the role to help start the operations. And I also do UX consulting. And for today's topic, we're doing heuristic evaluations. And I didn't even know what heuristic meant myself, even though I know what a heuristic evaluation is. But heuristic is simply understanding how people discover or learn something for themselves. And for a heuristic evaluation, we can basically call it a UX audit, where it's a hands-on approach to gauge how user-friendly your product or service is. So we're going to learn how to do a heuristic evaluation using the 10 different techniques. So there's 10 principles that Jacob Nielsen coined. And I know it's really small here, but the QR code is actually really helpful. That link will show you the PDF where you can read along what those 10 different principles are. And I'll have you scan that so that as I go through each one of them, you'll have it as reference and you can read and kind of follow along. All right, so we're gonna look at some of the examples of those principles. I reframed them as questions, and I asked ChatGPT to ask the question as if I was in 5th grade so that we can really understand. Because if you actually looked at the principles by Nielsen Norman, they're really hard to understand because it uses scientific jargon. And a little bit about Nielsen Norman. So Nielsen Norman is Jacob Nielsen and Don Norman. They're the fathers of UX. They've created this organization called the Nielsen Norman Group, where they created standards for practicing UX. And a lot of us who are in the practice will go to them as like the source of truth for best practices. So I highly suggest going to Nielsen Norman Group to learn more about different UX principles. And a lot of what I'm talking about today comes from their best practice of how to conduct this.
When you say go to the Nielsen Norman Group, what do you mean?
NielsenNormanGroup.com, I think, is their website. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. All right, so let's dive into some of those principles. The first principle, and I don't have the PDF up, but visibility and system status. So I'm not sure what the PDF says for all the jargon, but basically, do users know what's going on at all times? And an example of this is a "you are here" sign when you're at the mall. Okay, I can identify where I am and I know where I want to go. So what this might look like in your website or app is breadcrumbs. So do users know like what page am I on? If I click this button, will I know how to go back? Things like that. The second one is called match between the system and the real world. So does your product use words and ideas that people understand, or just ones that make sense to you? So a good example of this is at an ATM machine, these are how the number pads show up. And when you look at an iPhone screen, you'll see that the keyboard has the similar positioning for the numbers. And that it's because you already know you've been using ATMs for a long time. So if you use your iPhone and the numbers are positioned the same way, chances are you're not going to make a mistake when typing in that phone number that you're looking for. Sure.
One always with QZ? Am I the first person? Literally the first time I'm saying that.
Never saw QZ on number one.
That's a good observation. Yeah, maybe because 0 doesn't have any numbers on it, so they needed to relocate. Yeah. But that would be trippy because if I know my passcode in numbers is 5683, but I use letters, right? So if I tried to use the ATM, it might not, I would have those errors because the letter that I'm trying to. I did. Don't worry, it's just for my phone. But I think that's a great example. Like, why are my users, having a hard time putting in their PIN? Oh, it's because I associate these specific letters with these numbers. So if it's shifted by two letters, it might confuse them. So that's a great example of like how you can answer the question of, does your product use these words?
I have a follow-up question, but wouldn't this be like an example of what not to do since the Q's and the Z's are in different places on each pad?
Yeah, it's on the 7 and the 9.
Yeah. Like, that kind of breaks the whole reason for doing it, right?
Yeah, that's a good catch. When I was first designing this, I was like, oh, it makes sense because, the numbers are the same, but
you need a Q or a Z.
Yes, in your design. I think that's a perfect example of like how you would change this design to make it better to match what exists in the real world. Another example that you might see is, have you ever noticed on your stove, you have your stove 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have buttons, either they go up and down or they go vertically, and you're like, which one turns on the freaking stove? And so usually the icons will help you know where it's positioned. That way, like, I don't have a diagram, but you get what I'm saying. Having those icons match the positioning will help them better find where that stove one that you're trying to turn on is. All right, the third one is user control and freedom. Can people quickly fix mistakes or go back if they mess up? So usually when how this is used in UX is you have a dialogue for changes, and you ask them, hey, did you really want to make this change, or did you want to keep editing? So good UX has this, and bad UX is like, oh shoot, I didn't mean to make that change. How do I go back and make that edit? So you want to make sure that your designs have the ability to, 1, keep editing, and 2, confirm that they do want to make changes. The fourth one is consistency and standards. I'm going to close this. It's a little distracting. Thank you. So the fourth one is, do things always look and work the same way so people don't get confused? And this is one that I've broken at work, and it was really interesting. So the example that I have here is, back buttons are usually on the top left-hand side of a website, and that's universal, whether you're on a mobile or you're on desktop. And a convention that I broke, so we have automated dispensing cabinets, and you have a screen, and you advance on the screen, and then you open drawers. So sometimes the buttons open drawers. And what I did wrong was I put a cancel button at the bottom right. And my users, who were nurses, were really used to, they've done this workflow for 30 plus years now, and I'm trying to design a user interface for that. And what I've noticed is that they're clicking around and expecting that this button be the next button, and I had cancel there. So every time when I was doing usability testing, they would click that button and be like, why didn't it log me out or whatever. So that's a principle that I broke. I needed to make sure that the conventions followed what they were used to. So in this case, the bottom right was supposed to be sign out, and what I had was I think was like a cancel button. So I needed to make sure that we placed the same things where they expected it to be, because they were doing the same things for 30 years. Yes?
So like on that previous screen, can you go back? Should you always have the cancel, discard on the right hand side, and the left hand side always be to keep editing? Or does it? Because I've seen some people do it opposite.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yours, in that one case, it was not.
And it depends on what's that primary action that you want the user to do. Typically, your primary action is going to be the one on the right-hand side with your primary button, in that color. And then your secondary action, which is, in this case, keep editing, you're going to have that in your secondary button because maybe that's not the thing that they would want to do. So whatever you want to drive the user to do, typically you would have it as your primary button. Is there any other questions? All right. Any questions on this one before I go on to the next one? Okay, so the fifth principle is error prevention. Can we stop mistakes before they happen and help people fix them easily? So the easiest one to remember is when you're checking out. I know that this is super tiny, but when you are ordering something from Amazon or online, you usually have a, hey, let me check to make sure I have the right size, I have the right quantity before I actually purchase. So does your app or website have the ability to do this before a user completes an action? Can they edit their information? Can they edit what they're ordering? And can they do this easily? So one thing I've noticed in Amazon, I think they have, if you have a quantity of 1 and you want to delete it from your cart, usually you have a 0. And then it's like, okay, but is it still in my cart? And I think now instead of a 0, it goes to a trash can so that you actually delete that product from your cart. So you're not wondering if you're still purchasing it.
There's a restaurant website that I use sometimes. They make you get a verification code from them.
Oh, that's bad.
Place the order. So it's almost like 2 factors. It's like you got to place the order, and then they send you the verification code. You submit the verification code, and then they place the order.
Because they have too many codes.
That's a question I have. When does mitigation become inconvenience? How far do you go with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something that we're trying to figure out right now. But I guess it depends on data. How I guess.
Field testing probably, just like I would have to see how it works in that field.
Right. Like, are you okay with risking how many users you might drop off by having verification? Or are you hindering the number of transactions that happen? Like, for example, we have a verification code for our coaching business where you need to apply and you need to verify your email. We're okay with that because we want to qualify these leads before they get in, because without that verification, we're getting a flood of people who are just trying to fill out our form and spamming our inbox, and we don't like that. So it's okay to add that additional friction to make sure we're getting people who actually want to be part of our program. So it depends on what the trade-offs you're looking at. All right, number 6, recognition rather than recall. How can we make sure people don't have to remember too much when using our app? And a good example of this is, keeping the username field populated. That way the user can just go in and fill over whatever they need. Or if you have a dashboard and there's something that a user typically does, you have shortcuts. That way you don't have to do the additional clicks. So is there things in your website or app that can help users to go to where they want to without the additional clicks? Or how can we help them to figure out where they need to go without having them think? So another good example of this is having your menus have icons and text. I strongly advise people to add your icons and the text of what that menu item is. That way your users are not thinking, okay, this is an award icon. This is where I go to redeem the credits that I have. If you have the icon plus awards, then it's like, okay, I know that this is where I need to go. Eventually they'll, make that association, but if it's a new app, then definitely introduce both of those. All right, the 7th one is flexibility and efficiency of use. So can beginners use it and can super users use it? Is there ways for both of them to interact with their app and complete the task that they want to complete? So for example is creating bulk emails. Someone who is, maybe not tech savvy can go in and copy paste the different people that they want to send the email to. You can also have an email list with a BCC and insert multiple people that you want to send the email to. Or maybe if you're a super user and you know how to use automation, you can figure out how to do that and with one click of a button rather than having to copy paste. But your app should have all 3 of these things. That way you can cater to the different experience level of your users. All right, number 8 is probably in theory, an easy one, which is aesthetic and minimalist design. But in short is, does your design communicate the essential things and cut out the fluff? There's a lot of information that you can put, but on the screen, do you see what's absolutely necessary for your users? And so the example I have, pretty straightforward. If it's a clock, you don't need all of the additional noise here. All right. Number 9, help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. I think this is a big one. That is a huge opportunity for people who with startups or businesses. You always think about the happy path of how do I get from point A to point B? But what if they made a mistake or they need help undoing an action? And so the question I had is, how can we make error messages easy to understand and helpful? And what I really like about this example is when you say what happened for the error message to pop up, you don't just have a 404 with no way for them to recover. 2 is have empathy and provide reassurance, like, hey, your changes were saved, but try again. 3 is giving them a way out. So if trying again doesn't work, then provide them the next steps that they can do to help resolve that issue. And then the last thing is to reiterate what happened and provide ways to help them fix it.
If your changes were saved, where were they saved so that how to
Path location.
Yeah, basically be able to connect to your account.
I know this is hard to understand outside the context of the thing, but
yeah, I know.
the message is there.
Yeah, I appreciate this because I can't tell you how many times I literally had to go to Microsoft and go, hey, why can I not buy this?
How did that go?
I'm like, yeah. I had to have somebody manually go buy.
Oh, wow.
My account. I'm like, yeah, so I appreciate this.
For sure. All right, the last one is help in documentation, or does my design provide clear and easy to find instructions? Usually that's in the form of tooltips or onboarding, where it's like, hey, welcome to our site. Here's a few, tips to get you started on using it.
Actually, I have a question. Float over tooltips, would that be a good substitution for what you described earlier, like as far as just not having just the icon, but the icon and the text? Would a float over tooltip serve as a good substitution?
Yes, okay. And having some kind of affordance to let them know that this tooltip is accessible. Like if you're on mobile, are the users gonna know? Yeah, that's something that I'm still trying to solve is like,
That's hard, right? Like how do you
get
track
them
the finger to-
yeah, maybe an info icon so that they know to click it and then they can get more information on how to do the thing. All right, so those are the 10 kind of dumbed down versions of the usability principles, and now we're gonna start to practice using them in this next part of the workshop. So why should you do an audit? It's an easy way to identify usability issues. 2, this is something that you can do on your own, whether you're an owner or a developer or someone who's not a UX designer. You can do this without having to recruit other users, and it's super like easy to get into. And the third thing is it really helps you build strong UX instincts. I try to do this as much as possible with people who are asking me questions about UX. That way it helps me to remember what these principles are and to make sure that I'm sharp. But 2, it also helps other people to understand like, oh, these are the things that you look at when auditing my site. So highly suggest that you learn how to use this cheat sheet. And when should you do an audit? Usually it's during the early phases of a product. Before you get into the heavy development phase, you have at least, your happy path. You can use this audit to see, okay, what are the things that I'm missing, or what are the things that you still need to consider before I get into the development phase. And I don't know if there's designers in the room, but for designers, I like to do UX audits when I start a new project because it helps me to familiarize myself with the workflows, with the eye of, okay, what are the things that might need usability fixes? Yes?
No, sorry. Where's the intersection between UX audits and accessibility audits?
Good question. I think it could be both. UX is more about the functionality of am I able to complete these tasks? And you'll see that in the workshop. And then accessibility is more so looking at the different accessibility principles, such as, is there contrast? Is a screen reader able to go through this? So you kind of have to do both. It depends on what you need at that time. I would say do both. I know that in the UK, they're starting to pass laws where you have to meet accessibility compliance, at least to some degree, before getting fined. I hope that answered your question. Alrighty, so are we ready to give it a try? It's a smaller group, so it might be easier, it might be harder. But before you get going, giving it a try, I'm going to walk you through the 3 steps first, and then we're going to break out into partners. So let's go over those 3 steps, and then we're going to break out. So the step 0 is you're going to find a partner in this room. I don't know if there's designers in here, but it would be nice if you can partner with someone who doesn't know design. That way there's a little bit of an exchange there. Usually there's a bigger group. And I'll tell the designers to pair up with someone else. We tend to stick together. But the first step is to identify and map out the task that you want to evaluate. So for example, maybe you have an app or a product and your main workflow is, I don't know, you want to get people to sign up for your program, which is the thing that I'm working on right now. That would be step 1 is, okay, I want to figure out this workflow here. So here's an example, Banana Republic. The task is buying a shirt, so we've identified, okay, what are the steps to get to buying a shirt? So you can use your own app or website that you frequently use. I also have some examples if you don't want to figure out one on your own. Dutch Bros, it's pretty simple. I chose apps that aren't too complicated. That way you can really get into the depth of the actual auditing and not get perplexed by complex workflows. So Dutch Bros is, order a coffee or hi, hello. I use that for networking. You can create a virtual business card. So if you choose that one, you can also have an end product of having a virtual business card where you can use at Tech Alley. And then after you figure out what you wanted to do. You're just going to discuss that with your partner. Okay, which workflow do you want to work on? The step 2 is the bulk of the workshop, which is identifying your issues. And I want you to scan this QR code. You're going to need it for the workshop, but this PDF is the Nielsen-Norman Group article where it lists out the 10 principles and it asks you guiding questions of each of those principles. That way you can analyze. And I'll leave this up for a moment. Looks like everybody has it. So this is an example of what you see in the PDF. It kind of correlates to this, where the issue is, you can see that the text here is overlaid with the white shirt and it makes it unlegible. And so what you would write down is that the issue is that the text overlaps. And on the right-hand column is your recommendations. So maybe this person can use a different text color. Maybe there can be an outline around the text. Maybe use a drop shadow so you can make that text more punchy and easier to read. Or maybe you know, whatever the recommendation might be. And a tip for this is maybe there's 2 different workflows that you want to do. I recommend that one person drives the website and navigates that while the other person has the PDF open. And then if you get through the audit, then you can switch and do the other person's workflow. And this step is consolidating and prioritizing what fixes you might do. This is probably something that you wouldn't do in this workshop today, but I wanted to share, like, if you were to do this on your own, then this is how once I collect all of that data of like, oh, these are the different fixes, which one do I prioritize first? And there's different ways to do that. The first way is using affinity diagramming or using sticky notes to find out, okay, what are the different notes that we had and how can we start to group them in a way that we can start to find patterns. Another way is using this diagram to figure out, okay, what are the ones that are going to bring the most value to my user and is the lowest effort to me as the developer or designer. And then the third one is prioritizing using levels of urgency. And I won't get into this one too much because it's not really that applicable right now. But essentially, this is a diagram that we typically use at work to figure out, okay, of the things that we diagnosed in our audit, what are the things that we actually go over? With P0 being the critical ones that, create a system outage and that we need to respond to immediately. And P4s are negligible things that, are nice to haves, but, aren't going to break the bank. All right, so now it's breakout time. I'm going to have you guys pair up. And I will probably join a group or hover around, but you're gonna go ahead and practice using the PDF.